A long time ago, before Jack Sparrow became the pirate everyone knows, he was just a small boy. His real name was Jack, and he lived near the sea. Jack's father was a pirate, and his mother was a mysterious woman who was not around very much. Jack grew up hearing stories about ships, treasure, and adventures on the ocean. From the time he was little, Jack loved the water. He would sit on the shore for hours, watching ships sail by. He would imagine himself standing at the front of a great ship, the wind in his hair, shouting orders to his crew. Even when he was only a boy, Jack's mind was full of daring ideas and clever tricks. But life was not always easy for Jack. Because his father was a pirate, many people did not trust the Sparrow family. Other kids sometimes laughed at him or called him names. Jack never let that bother him too much. He would just grin, tip an invisible hat, and think to himself, "One day I'll be Captain Jack Sparrow, and then we'll see who laughs." Jack was clever, even as a child. When he wanted something, he could usually talk his way into getting it. If he could not, he would find another way. Once, when he was about 10 years old, Jack found an old toy boat at the docks. It was broken, but Jack fixed it up with bits of wood and string. He painted a little sparrow bird on the sail and called it the Sparrow. He would sail it across puddles, ponds, and even in the shallows of the beach. Watching his toy ship float gave him big dreams of one day having a real ship of his own. Jack's father, Captain Teague, was a pirate lord. He would come and go, sometimes vanishing for months before returning with wild tales of treasure, sea battles, and dangerous monsters. When Jack asked if he could join him, Captain Teague would smile and say, "Not yet, lad. The sea is no place for a boy, but your time will come." Even though Jack could not sail with his father yet, he learned everything he could about ships. He learned how ropes worked, how sails caught the wind, and how a captain had to be smart to lead his crew. Jack spent time around sailors, listening to their songs and stories. He was always curious, always asking questions, always eager to know more. One night, young Jack sat by the fire while his father told him an important lesson. Captain Teague said, "The sea is free, Jack. No king, no man, no one can own it. A pirate's life is not just about treasure. It is about freedom. Remember that." Those words stayed in Jack's heart forever. More than gold, more than jewels, Jack would always want freedom above all. When Jack was a little older, he faced his first true danger. A group of rough men came to his town, looking for trouble. They pushed people around and stole from the docks. Jack, being curious and brave, tried to outsmart them. He distracted the men by pretending to show them a hidden treasure map, while at the same time sneaking food back to the townsfolk they had robbed. Jack was not strong, but he was clever. This was the beginning of his way of fighting, not with swords or muscles, but with wit and trickery. By the time Jack reached his teenage years, he was already different from other boys. He had a sharp grin, a quick tongue, and a heart full of dreams. He wanted to see the world. He wanted to sail the seas. Most of all, he wanted a ship of his own. Every night before he fell asleep, Jack would whisper to himself, "Someday I'll be Captain Jack Sparrow, the greatest pirate anyone has ever seen." And in that moment, the boy who loved the sea was already on his way to becoming the legendary pirate captain. When Jack Sparrow grew into his teenage years, he was no longer just a boy dreaming on the shore. He was tall, quick on his feet, and cleverer than most grown men. By this time, he wanted nothing more than to set sail and see the world for himself. Jack's father, Captain Teague, still watched over him from time to time, but he could not keep Jack away from the sea forever. Jack begged sailors to let him join their crews. Most laughed at him. "You are too young, boy," they said. But Jack never gave up. One day, a ship called the Barnacle needed extra hands, and the captain agreed to take Jack aboard. At last, Jack's adventure had begun. Life on a ship was not easy. The work was hard. Jack had to scrub the decks, tie ropes, climb the tall masts, and carry heavy barrels. But Jack did not mind. He learned quickly and found joy in even the smallest tasks. He loved the sound of the waves, the feel of the salty air, and the sight of the endless blue horizon. Jack also learned how to talk to people. He had a way of making friends and tricking enemies. The crew soon noticed that Jack could talk his way out of almost anything. If someone was angry, Jack could calm them down. If someone was greedy, Jack could outwit them. His quick tongue was as sharp as a sword. On one voyage, Jack showed just how clever he was. The Barnacle was chased by pirates. The crew was terrified. The pirates had more men, more cannons, and a faster ship. Jack, though only a teenager, had an idea. He told the captain to steer the barnacle toward a narrow reef filled with sharp rocks. The pirate ship followed, thinking they had trapped their prey. But Jack knew the reef well. He had studied the maps and the tides. He guided the barnacle safely through the rocks while the enemy ship smashed into them and sank. The crew cheered, and Jack's name spread among sailors. Even though Jack was young, he was already becoming a legend. People said he was lucky, but Jack knew it was more than luck. It was his cleverness and his love for freedom that kept him alive. But Jack was not always serious. He loved fun and mischief too. When the crew was bored, Jack would tell wild stories. Some were true, some were made up, but all of them were exciting. He would talk about hidden treasures, cursed gold, and sea monsters with teeth as long as masts. The crew would laugh, sing, and call him Little Sparrow. Still, Jack also had enemies. Some sailors thought he was too proud. Some captains disliked how he always found tricks around rules. But Jack did not care. He was never one to follow orders blindly. He wanted to do things his own way. One important moment came when Jack was about 16. The barnacle was carrying enslaved people, chained and suffering. Jack hated it. He remembered his father's words. A pirate's life is about freedom. Jack could not stand to see others without it. So one night, Jack stole the keys and freed the captives. They escaped together, leaving the ship behind. That choice changed Jack's life. From then on, he was not just another sailor. He became known as a man who would stand for freedom, even if it meant making powerful enemies. Some called him a traitor, but others called him a hero. After leaving the barnacle, Jack found work on different ships. He sailed to faraway lands, met strange people, and saw wonders he had only dreamed of as a boy. He learned more about maps, compasses, and the stars in the sky. He learned to fight with a sword, though he never became the strongest. Instead, he learned how to fight smart. Jack always said, "Why fight when you can trick your way out?" By the time Jack turned 17, he already carried himself like a captain. He had no ship of his own yet, but he wore his hat proudly, walked with swagger, and spoke as though he commanded the seas. Some people laughed, but deep inside, Jack knew it was only a matter of time. One night, as he stared at the stars, Jack whispered the same words he had whispered as a child. "Someday I'll be Captain Jack Sparrow, the greatest pirate anyone has ever seen." And soon, his teenage adventures would lead him closer to that dream. By the time Jack Sparrow was almost a grown man, he had already sailed across many seas. He had seen storms, sea battles, and treasures hidden in strange places. But Jack's biggest challenge was still ahead of him. Trouble was waiting, and Jack was about to learn that being clever came with a price. Jack found work on a ship owned by the East India Trading Company. The company was powerful and cruel. They cared about money more than people. Their leader, a man named Cutler Beckett, noticed Jack's sharp mind and quick tongue. Beckett gave Jack the job of captain of a fine ship called the Wicked Wench. Jack was proud. At last, he had his own ship to command. He walked the deck with his hat tilted just right, giving orders as if he had been captain all his life. But the company wanted Jack to do something he hated. They ordered him to transport enslaved people across the seas. Jack remembered what he had done years ago on the Barnacle. He had freed those who were chained because he believed in freedom. Now, as captain of the Wicked Wench, he faced the same choice again. Jack made his decision quickly. He would not work for men like Beckett. Instead of carrying out his orders, Jack freed the enslaved people and let them escape. He knew Beckett would be furious, but Jack could not do otherwise. Freedom mattered more than gold. Beckett was not a man to forgive betrayal. When he found out, he punished Jack in a cruel way. He ordered the Wicked Wench to be burned and sunk. Jack's beloved ship, the first ship he ever commanded, was destroyed before his eyes. Jack was left with nothing. To make it worse, Beckett branded Jack with the letter P for pirate, burned into his skin. From that day forward, anyone who saw it would know what he was. Jack was angry, heartbroken, and lost. But he was not the type to give up. He drifted, shipless, until he came upon a dark bargain. He met Davy Jones, the captain of the ghostly ship known as the Flying Dutchman. Jones was a strange, sea-haunted creature who collected souls in his service. Jack begged him to raise the Wicked Wench from the depths of the sea. Davy Jones agreed, but at a cost. Jack's ship would sail again, but after 13 years, Jack's soul would belong to Jones. The Wicked Wench rose from the sea, blackened by fire and smoke. Its sails were torn, its wood scarred. Jack looked at it and smiled. "You are still my ship," he said. From that day forward, It was no longer called the Wicked Wench. Jack renamed it the Black Pearl. With his ship reborn, Jack became a true pirate captain. He gathered a crew and began to sail the seas, faster and wilder than anyone else. The Black Pearl was the fastest ship on the ocean, and Jack Sparrow was the trickiest captain alive. But trouble never stayed far away. Jack made enemies everywhere he went. Other pirates wanted his ship. The East India Company wanted revenge. Even the sea itself seemed to throw dangers his way. One of the worst enemies he made was a man named Hector Barbassa. Barbassa had sailed with Jack for years. Jack trusted him, laughed with him, and shared adventures with him. But Barbassa was greedy. He wanted the Black Pearl for himself. One dark night, Barbassa led a mutiny. The crew turned against Jack, marooning him on a deserted island with nothing but a pistol and a single shot. Jack was alone, with no ship, no crew, and no hope. But Jack Sparrow was never truly beaten. He used his cleverness to escape the island. Some say he tied sea turtles together to float away. Others say he tricked smugglers into giving him passage. Whatever the truth was, Jack returned to the world, more determined than ever. From that day on, Jack Sparrow lived by two rules: never trust too easily, and never let anyone take away his freedom again. Though he had lost his ship once more, Jack's legend was growing. Sailors whispered about him in taverns. Children played at being Captain Jack Sparrow. He was becoming famous, not just for his luck and tricks, but for his spirit. And soon, his path would cross with new friends and foes. A young blacksmith named Will Turner, a brave woman named Elizabeth Swan, and a cursed treasure that would change everything. Jack Sparrow's real adventures were only just beginning. Jack Sparrow drifted from place to place, always chasing ships, treasure, and rum, but in his heart he still wanted one thing most of all: the Black Pearl. It was his ship, his pride, and his freedom. But Barbassa still had it, and Barbassa and his crew were no longer ordinary pirates. They had stolen a chest of cursed Aztec gold. At first, the coins seemed like normal treasure, but each piece carried a terrible magic. The curse made Barbassa and his crew into undead pirates. By day they looked normal, but by moonlight their true forms were revealed. Their skin turned to bone, their faces to skulls. They could not feel, could not eat, could not drink. They were trapped between life and death. The only way to break the curse was to return all the stolen coins and repay the blood they had taken. Meanwhile, in the town of Port Royal, a young woman named Elizabeth Swan discovered one of those cursed coins. She had it hidden since she was a girl, when she rescued a boy from a shipwreck years before. That boy was Will Turner, now grown into a skilled blacksmith. Elizabeth wore the coin as a necklace, never knowing the power it held. One day, Jack Sparrow arrived in Port Royal. He had no ship, no crew, and only a plan in his head. He stumbled into town looking for a way to get the pearl back. But fate had other ideas. When Elizabeth fell into the sea and nearly drowned, the cursed coin around her neck sent out a strange signal. Jack jumped into the water and saved her life. For a moment, it seemed like Jack might finally be a hero. But the guards of Port Royal did not see it that way. To them, Jack was a pirate. He was captured and locked in the fort's dungeon. While Jack sat behind bars, Barbassa and his cursed crew attacked Port Royal, searching for the coin Elizabeth carried. They kidnapped her, thinking she could break their curse. Will Turner knew he had to save her. He also knew he could not do it alone, so he turned to Jack Sparrow. Jack had tricks, and Will had courage. Together they escaped from the fort and stole a ship. It was not the Black Pearl, but it was enough to start the chase. Jack and Will followed Barbassa's crew to their secret hideout, Isla de Muerta, the island of the dead. Along the way, Jack revealed his plan. He wanted the pearl back, and he would use Will and Elizabeth to get it. Will wanted only to rescue Elizabeth, but Jack always had his eyes on the bigger prize. When they finally faced Barbassa, things became even more dangerous. Barbassa was clever and cruel. He mocked Jack, remembering the night he stole the pearl. Under the moonlight, Barbassa showed Elizabeth his true cursed form, a skeleton with empty eyes and rattling bones. She was horrified, but she also learned the truth. The pirates could not die until the curse was lifted. The battle that followed was fierce. Swords clashed, cannons roared, and moonlight revealed the undead pirates as terrifying monsters. Jack used every trick he had. He even stole a coin from the cursed chest, so he could fight Barbassa as one of the undead himself, avoiding death. Will, meanwhile, used his bravery to return the last coin and spill his blood on it, breaking the curse at last. With the curse gone, Barbassa and his crew were human again. But that also meant they could die. Barbassa fell, defeated at last. The Black Pearl was free again. For a brief, shining moment, Jack Sparrow had everything he wanted. His ship, his freedom, and his legend growing larger than ever. But fate, as always, had other plans. Back in Port Royal, Jack was captured once more. He stood on the gallows, ready to be hanged for being a pirate. But just when it seemed the end had come, Will Turner stepped forward. He defied the guards and saved Jack, showing that their bond was more than just a deal. It was the start of true friendship. With Elizabeth safe, Will and she admitted their feelings for one another. And Jack, clever as ever, escaped in the chaos. He leapt into the sea, where the Black Pearl awaited him. As the wind filled its dark sails, Jack Sparrow stood at the helm, his compass in hand. He grinned and whispered, "Bring me that horizon." The Black Pearl sailed on, and the legend of Captain Jack Sparrow grew. But this was only the beginning, for new dangers were waiting beneath the waves. Captain Jack Sparrow now had his beloved ship, the Black Pearl, and the open sea stretched out before him. He should have been happy. But deep inside, Jack knew something was chasing him. A promise he had made years ago was coming back to haunt him. Remember when Jack asked Davy Jones to raise the wicked wench from the depths, turning it into the Black Pearl? Jones had given him 13 years of freedom before the debt came due. Now the time was up. Davy Jones wanted Jack Sparrow's soul to serve forever aboard the ghostly ship, the Flying Dutchman. Jack tried to laugh it off, as he always did, but he was afraid. Jones was no ordinary man. He was half human, half sea creature, with a beard of writhing tentacles and a heart locked away in a chest. His ship could vanish beneath the waves and reappear anywhere. And worst of all, Jones commanded the Kraken, a monster of the deep with arms so huge they could crush a ship in seconds. While Jack was worrying about his fate, other troubles began. In Port Royal, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swan were about to be married when soldiers stormed in and arrested them. The East India Company, led by the ruthless Lord Cutler Becket, wanted them punished for helping Jack escape execution. Becket made Will a deal. Find Jack Sparrow and bring him the magical compass Jack carried, and he would free Elizabeth. Will set out in search of Jack. He found him hiding from Jones, trying to scheme his way out of the deal. At first, Jack was delighted to see Will, another chance to use someone else's courage for his own plans. Jack explained the truth. The only way to defeat Davy Jones was to find the chest that held his heart. Whoever controlled the heart controlled Jones himself. So the race began. Jack, Will, Elizabeth, and even Lord Becket wanted the dead man's chest. Each of them for their own reasons. Jack to save his soul, Will to save his father, who was trapped serving Jones, and Becket to control the seas. The journey was wild and dangerous. Jack tricked his way out of one trap after another. On one island, he was captured by a tribe who thought he was a god. They wanted to cook him and eat him. Jack barely escaped, running through the jungle with the tribesmen chasing him, bones rattling and spears flying. As always, he survived with his wit and luck. But the biggest test came when Jack and his friends finally reached the island where the chest was buried. There, Jack, Will, and another pirate named Norrington all fought each other in a three-way sword battle. They ran through the jungle, leapt onto water wheels, and clashed in the sand, all for the chest. Meanwhile, Elizabeth tried to keep the cursed crew of the Flying Dutchman from stealing it back. In the end, the chest was opened, and the beating heart of Davy Jones was revealed inside. Norrington stole it and ran off, planning to use it to regain his honor. Jack, Will, and Elizabeth were left to face the consequences. And consequences came quickly. Davy Jones, furious that someone had found his heart, unleashed the Kraken. The monster attacked the Black Pearl, wrapping its enormous tentacles around the ship, splintering wood, and dragging sailors into the sea. The crew fought bravely, stabbing at the slimy arms and firing cannons, but the Kraken was unstoppable. Jack, for once, had a chance to run. He could escape in a small boat and leave everyone behind. For a moment, it seemed he would do just that. But then something surprising happened. Jack returned. He stood tall, sword in hand, and faced the Kraken alone, buying time for his crew to escape. He was still afraid, still trickster Jack Sparrow, but deep inside, he was also brave. The Kraken swallowed him whole, dragging him down into the dark depths of the sea. The Black Pearl was left broken, its crew grieving the loss of their captain. Elizabeth and Will mourned, but they also argued. Elizabeth confessed that she had chained Jack to the mast, so he could not escape. She had tricked him, because she believed only Jack could face the Kraken. It was her way of saving the rest of them. The crew did not know whether to hate her or thank her. As they sat in despair, someone new entered the room. Captain Barbassa, the very pirate who had betrayed Jack years before, had been brought back from the dead. He grinned and said they would need him if they wanted to save Jack Sparrow. Because Jack was not gone forever. He was trapped in Davy Jones's locker, a strange world at the edge of death. And his friends were about to risk everything to bring him back. Jack Sparrow was gone, dragged down into the sea by the Kraken. To everyone else, he was dead. But Jack was never one to follow ordinary rules. Instead of passing on, he was trapped in Davy Jones's locker, a strange, endless place where the dead wander. The locker was not like the world above. It was a desert of white salt and sand, with a sea that stretched forever. Jack was alone there, with only his ship, the Black Pearl, stranded on dry land. But Jack's mind was tricky, and the longer he stayed, the stranger things became. He saw many versions of himself, arguing, shouting, and talking nonsense. He was stuck with his own thoughts, and that was almost worse than being eaten by the Kraken. Meanwhile, above the waves, Jack's friends were not ready to let him go. Will Turner, Elizabeth Swan Gibbs, and the rest of the crew wanted to bring him back. To do that, they needed someone who knew how to reach the locker. That someone was Captain Barbassa, who had been brought back from the dead by the powerful sea goddess, Calypso. The plan was dangerous. They would sail to the world's edge, dive over, and somehow return with Jack. Most people would have called it madness. But for Jack Sparrow, madness was ordinary. Their journey took them to Singapore, where they met another pirate lord, Saufone. The seas were becoming more dangerous by the day. Lord Cutler Beckett and the East India Trading Company were hunting pirates everywhere, using Davy Jones and the Flying Dutchman as their weapon. Pirates were being destroyed one by one. The only hope left was for all pirate lords to come together and fight. But first, they had to save Jack. With Saufeng's maps and a bit of trickery, Barbassa's crew sailed the Black Pearl straight to the end of the world. The sea tipped up like a waterfall, and down they plunged into Davy Jones's locker. There, they found Jack Sparrow, still arguing with the many Jacks inside his head. At first, he thought they were just more voices, but when he saw Will, Elizabeth, and Gibbs, he realized they were real. He tried to act as though he had not missed them, but deep inside, he was glad to see familiar faces. Getting back was not easy. The crew had to flip the ship upside down at sunset, riding it back to the world of the living. It was a wild, upside-down adventure, but somehow they managed it. Jack was free again. Back in the living world, things grew even more tangled. Jack learned that Will was trying to use him as a way to save his father, Bootstrap Bill, from serving forever on the Flying Dutchman. Elizabeth was trying to prove herself as a leader. Barbassa wanted the pirates united. And Jack, of course, mostly wanted to keep his freedom without giving up his soul to Davy Jones. The pirates finally gathered at Shipwreck Cove, a hidden fortress where the Brethren Court of Pirate Lords met. Jack's father, Captain Teague, was there too, reminding Jack of where he came from. The pirate lords argued about what to do. Some wanted to hide. Some wanted to fight. In the end, it was Elizabeth who surprised everyone by becoming Pirate King, chosen by vote. She gave a speech that inspired them all to rise up against Beckett and Jones. The final battle was unlike anything the seas had ever seen. The Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman faced each other in a storm, cannon fire thundering as rain poured down. The whirlpool of the maelstrom spun around them, pulling ships into the deep. Swords clashed, lightning struck, and the Kraken's bones floated in the waves. Jack, as always, fought in his own way. He swung on ropes, danced between enemies, and used tricks more than strength. At one point, he even managed to steal the chest that held Davy Jones's heart. But Will Turner had a bigger role to play. When Jones stabbed Will, it seemed the young man would die. Jack, for once, showed a rare moment of sacrifice. Instead of saving himself, he helped Will stab Jones's heart, making Will the new captain of the Flying Dutchman. Jones was destroyed, falling into the sea, his curse broken. The Flying Dutchman disappeared beneath the waves, only to rise again, reborn with Will at the helm. He was alive, but bound to the ship, destined to sail it for 10 years at a time. With the Dutchmen on their side, the pirates turned the tide. Lord Beckett's fleet, once so mighty, was shattered. Beckett himself was destroyed, his ship blown to splinters as he walked calmly to his end. The battle was won, but the price was heavy. Elizabeth and Will shared only one day together as husband and wife before Will returned to the sea for his duty. Barbassa stole the Black Pearl again, leaving Jack stranded with only a dinghy. But Jack Sparrow never saw defeat as the end. He smiled, pocketed a piece of the map to the Fountain of Youth, and set off on a new adventure. Because for Captain Jack Sparrow, the horizon always promised more. After the great battle at the Maelstrom, Jack Sparrow once again found himself without a ship. Barbassa had stolen the Black Pearl, as he had done before, and Jack was left drifting in a little boat. But Jack was never one to stay still for long. He had a new dream now, the Fountain of Youth. Legends said that the fountain could give eternal life to anyone who drank from it. To Jack, this sounded like the perfect way to escape debts, curses, and even time itself. But Jack was not the only one looking for it. Barbassa wanted it, the Spanish Navy wanted it, and even the King of England sent ships to find it. And leading one of those ships was a dangerous old rival of Jack's, Blackbeard. Blackbeard was no ordinary pirate. He was feared across the seas, his beard filled with smoke and fire, his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, filled with dark magic. His sword could control ropes, sails, and even the ship itself, like a living creature. He was cruel, merciless, and he wanted the fountain to live forever. Jack became tangled in this new adventure when rumors spread that he was raising a crew for the fountain. But it wasn't Jack, it was an imposter using his name. When Jack tried to put an end to it, he discovered who was behind the trick, Angelica, a woman from his past. She was clever, beautiful, and dangerous, just like Jack. Years ago, they had shared a spark, but she was also someone Jack had tricked and left behind. Now she had returned, and she was pretending to be him. Angelica revealed something else. She was Blackbeard's daughter, and she wanted Jack to help them find the fountain. Jack had no choice. He ended up aboard Blackbeard's ship, sailing into danger once more. The journey to the fountain was filled with challenges. First, they needed to capture a mermaid, for the fountain required her tear as part of its ritual. Jack and the crew sailed to a dark bay where the waters glowed in the moonlight. There, the mermaids appeared, beautiful but deadly. Their songs were enchanting, but their teeth were sharp, and they dragged sailors beneath the waves. A fierce battle followed with fire, nets, and screams. At last, they captured one mermaid, named Serena. Unlike the others, she was gentle and kind, and she grew close to a young missionary on the ship. Next, they needed silver chalices, cups that once belonged to Ponce de Leon, the explorer who had first searched for the fountain. Jack, of course, was sent to steal them. He climbed cliffs, tricked guards, and escaped traps, always with a grin on his face. He returned with the chalices, but not without causing chaos along the way. At last, the race to the fountain came to an end. Jack, Blackbeard, Angelica, Barbassa, and even the Spanish all converged at the same spot. A great battle broke out, swords clashing in the ruins of the fountain's cave. The water sparkled, promising eternal life, but it could only be given to one person by taking years from another. In the chaos, Blackbeard was wounded by a poisoned sword. Angelica was also cut. Jack faced a choice. He could use the fountain to save Angelica, or he could save Blackbeard. For once, Jack showed a bit of heart. He tricked Blackbeard into drinking the water meant for him, while Angelica drank the other cup. Blackbeard's life ended, and Angelica survived. But Jack, being Jack, did not stick around. Though Angelica begged him to stay with her, he left her stranded on an island, saying it was for her own good. But perhaps also because Jack Sparrow always feared being tied down. Barbassa, meanwhile, had taken his revenge on Blackbeard. He had stolen the Queen Anne's Revenge and claimed it as his own, setting himself up once more as a powerful captain. And Jack, he was left with no ship, but still with his freedom. He strolled along the shore, smiling to himself. He had not gained eternal life, but he had escaped danger again, and the horizon was wide open. Captain Jack Sparrow was not finished. More adventures still waited for him, with ghosts from his past ready to return. Captain Jack Sparrow was older now. He still had his sharp grin, his quick tricks, and his love of rum, but the years of adventure had left him a little slower and a little more tired. Still, trouble always seemed to find Jack, whether he wanted it or not. This time, the trouble came from the past. Years ago, when Jack was still very young, he had defeated a terrifying Spanish captain named Armando Salazar. Salazar had hunted pirates across the seas, sinking ships and showing no mercy. But Jack had tricked him. In a daring move, Jack lured Salazar's ship, the Silent Mary, into the deadly rocks of the Devil's Triangle. The ship was smashed, and Salazar and his men were cursed, trapped as ghostly figures doomed to wander the triangle forever. Now, after many years, Salazar and his crew escaped the triangle. They returned to the seas, but not as living men. They were ghosts, pale and twisted, with hollow eyes and broken bodies that moved like shadows. Salazar had only one goal: to destroy every pirate alive. And at the top of his list was the man who had defeated him long ago, Jack Sparrow. Jack was down on his luck when Salazar returned. He had no real ship, no treasure, and his crew was tired of his schemes. When Salazar's ghostly fleet began sinking ships, Jack knew he needed something powerful to save himself. That something was the Trident of Poseidon. The trident held the power of the sea itself, and it could break all curses upon the ocean. But Jack was not the only one searching for it. A young man named Henry Turner wanted the trident too. Henry was the son of Will Turner and Elizabeth Swan. He had grown up without his father, because Will was still bound to the Flying Dutchman, cursed to sail the seas for 10 years at a time. Henry believed the trident was the key to breaking his father's curse and freeing him. Henry teamed up with Karina Smith, a smart and brave young woman who studied the stars. Karina carried a mysterious diary that she believed held the clues to the trident's location. Everyone else called her a witch because of her knowledge, but Henry trusted her. Together, they found Jack Sparrow, hoping he could help them. At first, Jack was only interested in saving himself. He joked, stumbled, and tried to escape danger at every turn. But deep inside, he cared more than he admitted. With Henry and Karina by his side, Jack set out on yet another wild adventure. The journey was full of close escapes. They were chased through towns, attacked on the seas, and haunted by Salazar's ghostly crew. At one point, Jack nearly lost his head to a guillotine, spinning round and round as the blade dropped. Somehow, he always managed to slip away at the last second. Finally, they reached the place where the trident was hidden. The sea opened up, revealing a secret path, glowing with the power of the gods. But Salazar was not far behind. A great battle erupted, with ghostly sailors clashing against Jack, Henry, and Karina. In the middle of the fight, Henry shattered the trident, breaking its magic. The sea roared, lightning flashed, and waves crashed. All curses tied to the sea were broken. Salazar and his ghostly crew crumbled away, gone at last. And far away, the curse binding Will Turner to the Flying Dutchman was broken too. For the first time in many years, Will was free to return to land and to his family. Henry was reunited with his father, and Elizabeth was reunited with her husband. It was a joyful ending for them. As for Jack Sparrow, he once again sailed away, free as the wind. He had no treasure, no kingdom, and sometimes not even a ship. But he had what mattered most to him: his freedom and the open horizon. And so, Captain Jack Sparrow lived on, his legend still growing, his name still whispered in every port, and his story still not finished. For with Jack Sparrow, there would always be another adventure waiting just over the waves. Years passed, and Captain Jack Sparrow grew older. His hair became a little grayer, his steps a little slower, and sometimes his memory was not as sharp as before. But even so, his eyes still sparkled with mischief, and his grin was as clever as ever. By now, Jack had become a true legend of the seas. Children in ports played games pretending to be Captain Jack Sparrow. Sailors sang songs about his wild escapes, his tricks, and his endless search for treasure. Some of the stories were true, and some were not, but Jack never minded. In fact, he enjoyed hearing tales about himself, especially when they made him sound braver and grander than he really was. Jack still loved his ship, the Black Pearl, and whenever he could, he stood proudly at its helm, hat tilted, compass in hand, gazing at the horizon. But Jack knew his days of endless running were slowing down. He no longer wanted to chase every rumor of treasure. Instead, he wanted to enjoy the sea itself, the sunsets, the stars, and the laughter of a good crew. Yet trouble never forgot about Captain Jack Sparrow. Even in his older years, he still had enemies. Old rivals, new hunters, and powerful men who wanted his ship or his compass continued to chase him. Jack, of course, always found a way to outsmart them. Sometimes he did it with clever tricks, sometimes with pure luck, and sometimes by simply running away at the perfect moment. One of Jack's greatest joys was meeting younger pirates who had heard stories of him. They would look at him in awe, asking, "Are you really Captain Jack Sparrow?" Jack would puff out his chest, tip his hat, and reply, "Captain Jack Sparrow." He would tell them tales of cursed gold, ghostly ships, sea monsters, and the time he escaped the Kraken. His stories were so wild that some did not believe him, but that never bothered Jack. After all, he knew the truth, and the legend was even better. There were times when Jack sat quietly, thinking about the past. He remembered Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann, and how their love had endured even through curses. He remembered Angelica, with her fiery spirit. He remembered Barbassa, his greatest enemy and in some ways his greatest ally. Jack often laughed at these memories, even the sad ones, because for him, every twist of fate was part of the grand adventure of life. As the years went on, Jack began to think about what it meant to be free. He realized that freedom was not just about running from enemies or chasing treasures. It was about living life in your own way, choosing your own path, and never letting anyone else control your heart. That was the lesson he carried from his father, Captain Teague, and the one he lived by every single day. In his later years, Jack became more of a wandering storyteller than a treasure hunter. He could be found in taverns by the sea, surrounded by wide-eyed listeners. With a mug in hand, he would spin tales of the high seas, adding extra twists and turns with every telling. Sometimes he made himself the hero, sometimes the fool, but always the legend. And though Jack grew older, the sea never stopped calling to him. Whenever the tide rose and the wind shifted, Jack would return to the Black Pearl, ready to chase the horizon once more. He knew that one day his story would end, but not yet. Not while there were still new adventures waiting out there. For as long as there were waves and stars, storms and sunrises, there would be Captain Jack Sparrow, sailing free, forever chasing the horizon, forever telling his story. Long, long ago, when the seas were wild and the world was full of mystery, there lived a pirate like no other. His name was Captain Jack Sparrow. Some said he was the cleverest pirate who ever lived. Others said he was the luckiest. But all agreed that he was unforgettable. Jack's story began when he was just a boy who dreamed of freedom. He grew up by the sea, learned from sailors, and tricked his way into adventure after adventure. He lost ships, found ships, made enemies, and made friends. He faced curses, sea monsters, ghostly captains, and battles that shook the oceans. And through it all, he survived with a grin, a trick, and a twinkle in his eye. Jack never wanted to be the richest pirate. He never wanted to rule the seas or wear a crown. What Jack wanted most was freedom. The freedom to choose his own path, to sail where the wind blew, and to be himself without anyone else telling him what to do. That was what made him truly different. Some people said he was foolish, because he often ran away instead of fighting. Others said he was brave, because he stood against impossible odds. But perhaps the truth was somewhere in between. Jack Sparrow was both a fool and a hero, a trickster and a friend, selfish and kind, all at the same time. That was what made him Captain Jack Sparrow. As the years passed, Jack's legend grew. Sailors whispered his name in taverns. Children played games pretending to be him. Songs were sung about how he outsmarted Barbassa, fooled Davy Jones, and escaped the Kraken. The stories spread from port to port, and each telling made them bigger and brighter. One day, Jack Sparrow grew old. His hair was silver, his steps slower, but he still had that same sparkle in his eye. He still tipped his hat just so, still told stories with his wild hands, and still laughed in the face of danger. He was never truly done with the sea. Whenever he could, he returned to the Black Pearl, feeling the wind on his face and the horizon calling his name. No one knows exactly what became of Jack in the end. Some say he sailed the Black Pearl into the setting sun and never returned. Some say he found a secret island where he still lives, laughing and drinking, waiting for the next adventure. And some believe he became part of the sea itself, his spirit sailing forever on the tides. But one thing is certain, the legend of Captain Jack Sparrow will never die. For as long as there are waves crashing on the shore, as long as there are sailors dreaming of freedom, as long as children play at being pirates, Jack Sparrow's story will live on. And if you ever find yourself standing on the beach, staring at the endless horizon, you might just hear the whisper of the wind and the creak of a ship's sails. And if you listen closely, you might hear a familiar voice say, with a grin, "Captain Jack Sparrow." After one of his many escapes from angry sailors, Jack Sparrow and his crew drifted across waters they had never sailed before. The stars above were strange, and the compass Jack always trusted spun wildly, as though even it was confused about which way was north. After 3 days with no clear direction, the Black Pearl glided into a fog that smelled of salt and something older, something heavy. When the fog cleared, they saw an island ahead. It was unlike any island they had seen before. Jagged black rocks jutted from the water like giant teeth, circling the shore as though guarding it. No birds flew above it. No waves broke upon its beach. The island was deathly still, except for the wind. The wind did not blow like normal. It whistled and howled as if hundreds of ghostly voices were whispering at once. The crew shivered. "That's no ordinary island," Gibbs muttered, his eyes wide. "No map shows it. No sailor speaks of it. Mark my words, Jack, it's cursed." Jack, of course, grinned. "Cursed islands, Mr. Gibbs, are the best kind. Do you know why?" He leaned close, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Because all the ordinary sailors are too frightened to take the treasure." He gave his hat a little tilt, winked, and ordered the crew to lower the boats. They rowed to the shore in uneasy silence. The sand was black, the trees twisted and bent, and the ground seemed to hum beneath their feet. Then they saw them, stones taller than men, carved into the shapes of skulls. Their empty eye sockets glowed faintly with pale blue light that flickered like candle flames. "Skulls don't glow," said Cotton, shaking his head. "These do," Jack replied cheerfully, striding forward as though the glowing skulls were nothing more than friendly signposts. The crew hung back, muttering prayers, but Jack pushed them forward, teasing them about being afraid of a bit of stone with a flair for the dramatic. And then, deeper into the island, they found it, a cave mouth yawning wide, lined with jagged stone like the teeth of some giant beast. Inside the cave, golden light shimmered. The walls were stacked with golden idols, cracked urns spilling silver coins, and jeweled skulls sparkling like stars in the dark. The crew gasped. All fear seemed to vanish as they rushed forward, stuffing their pockets and filling sacks. Jack, however, walked more slowly, his fingers brushing the treasures as though he were choosing. His eyes locked onto a skull carved from obsidian, with ruby eyes that burned like fire. He reached out and lifted it, and then the whispering began. It came not from the wind, but from the skulls themselves. Their hollow voices hissed around the cave, overlapping in a chorus of warnings. "Leave, leave, leave, or join us forever. The greedy never escape." The crew froze, then dropped their plunder in panic. Coins clattered, jewels rolled across the floor. One man screamed, bolting for the cave's mouth, and the others followed, tripping over each other to flee back to the boats. But Jack Sparrow was not like other men. Instead of running, he stood perfectly still, tilting his head curiously. Then he began talking to the voices. "Well now," Jack said lightly, as though addressing old friends. "You've made your point, very terrifying, very mysterious. But I must ask, do you ever get tired of whispering all the time? Must play havoc on the throat." The voices grew louder, angrier. "Leave or suffer?" Jack grinned wider. "Suffer, yes, terrible thought, but hear me out. What if, instead of threats, we strike up a bargain? Say, you give me directions to your best treasure, and I promise not to redecorate this fine cave of yours with my boots." The voices paused. For a moment, the cave fell silent. Then slowly, the whispering changed. It no longer sounded like threats, but like curious murmurs. The glowing eyes of the skulls flickered, and with a rumble, the ground beneath Jack's feet shifted. A wall of stone slid aside, revealing a hidden passage deeper into the cave. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Knew we'd come to an understanding," he said with a bow, tucking the jeweled skull under his arm as if it were a prize. Inside the secret chamber, the air was cooler, filled with the smell of old salt and ink. On the wall, carved into smooth black stone, was a map, not of any single place, but of the seas themselves. Strange currents, hidden whirlpools, and secret islands were etched in delicate lines, places no sailor had ever dared to go. Jack studied it carefully, his eyes gleaming. This was more than treasure. This was adventure waiting to happen. He traced his finger across the routes, whispering to himself. Ah, a shortcut through the storms of the south, and here, an island shaped like a serpent, and there, oh, that looks promising. He pulled out a scrap of parchment and quickly sketched the map, humming as he worked. When Jack returned to the shore, the crew was pale and shaken, refusing to look back at the island. They begged him never to speak of it again. "Best to forget it, Captain," Gibbs insisted. But Jack only smiled, tucking the copy of the map into his coat alongside a pouch of glittering jewels. He looked back at the dark island one last time, tipped his hat in farewell, and muttered, "Many thanks for the hospitality." As the Black Pearl sailed away, Jack stood at the rail, the wind in his hair, and the map safe against his chest. To the crew, the island was a nightmare to be forgotten. But to Jack Sparrow, it was something else entirely. It was not just treasure. It was the promise of more adventures, more stories, and more legends yet to be written. There was a time when Captain Jack Sparrow thought he had sailed every kind of sea. He had crossed waters bright as sapphire and calm as glass. He had braved storms so fierce they tore ships apart like toys. He had fought monsters in the depths and slipped away from navies at his heels. But nothing in all his adventures had prepared him for the frozen seas of the north. It began, as most things did with Jack, with a rumor. In a smoky tavern in Tortuga, he overheard an old sailor rambling about a place where the ocean itself turned to glass, and the sky danced with colors of fire. "There's treasure buried there," the sailor slurred. "Jewels older than empires, locked in ice. But beware, for no man returns from the frozen seas." Jack's ears perked up at the word treasure. He leaned across the table, smiled with all the charm he could muster, and soon had the old sailor's map in hand. By the next morning, the Black Pearl was heading north, much to the crew's dismay. "Captain," Gibbs grumbled as the air grew colder, "these waters aren't meant for ships. The sails'll freeze, the hull crack, and we'll all be frozen solid before we see a single coin." Jack waved his hand carelessly. "Details, Mr. Gibbs. Icicles, snowflakes, frozen toes, merely minor inconveniences. Treasure, on the other hand, is a very warm thought." As they sailed further, the sea turned strange. The water darkened until it looked almost black, and chunks of ice floated past like drifting ghosts. The wind bit at their faces, and frost coated the rigging. Then came the great icebergs, towering walls of blue and white, drifting silently, as though the sea had grown mountains. The Black Pearl threaded her way between them, creaking with every turn. One night, the crew awoke to a sound unlike any they had heard before. The sky shimmered with dancing lights, green, purple, and gold ribbons that swirled and flickered across the heavens. It was beautiful but eerie, and with the lights came a deep groaning sound, like the earth itself was complaining. Cracks split across the ice sheets, and the sea growled beneath them. The next day they found it, a ship, frozen solid in the ice. Its sails were torn, its hull split, but its name could still be read, the Northern Star. The crew clambered aboard, teeth chattering, to search for valuables. Inside, they found skeletons of sailors, their faces twisted in frozen terror, still clutching at ropes and oars. Then they heard it, a voice, soft but clear, echoing through the icy air. "Leave this place," it warned. "The sea is not yours." The crew panicked, racing back to the Pearl. But Jack lingered, brushing frost from a chest half buried in the snow. With effort, he cracked it open, revealing not gold but crystal shards that glowed faintly with inner light. He lifted one, and the cold shot through his arm like fire. Back on the Pearl, Gibbs begged him to throw it overboard. "That's cursed, Captain. Mark my words, no good will come of it." But Jack only smiled, teeth chattering. "Cursed, blessed, shiny, call it what you like, Mr. Gibbs. It's treasure, and treasure never hurts anyone much." The journey back was worse than the journey north. Ice closed in around the Pearl, grinding against her hull. The wind howled like a beast, and the auroras flared above, brighter and stranger each night. The crew swore they saw figures moving on the ice, tall, pale shadows with glowing eyes that followed the ship wherever it went. One night, when the Pearl was nearly trapped, the shadows came closer. They whispered in voices that froze the crew's blood, warning Jack again to return what he had taken. The crew begged him to listen, but Jack stood at the bow, clutching the glowing crystal. "Return it," he shouted into the storm. "My dear frosty friends, you must not know me at all." And then, as if in answer, the ice split beneath them. A great fissure cracked open, and the Pearl rocked dangerously. The shadows wailed, the aurora blazed, and for a moment it seemed certain they would all be dragged down into the black water below. But somehow, as always, Jack found a way. He held the crystal high, muttered something that sounded suspiciously like nonsense, and the aurora flared one final time. The shadows vanished. The ice shifted, opening a narrow channel, just wide enough for the Pearl to escape. By dawn, they had broken free into open water, leaving the frozen seas behind. The crew swore they would never speak of it again. Gibbs crossed himself and muttered about unnatural places. Jack, however, sat in his cabin, turning the glowing crystal over in his hand. He tucked it into a hidden compartment in his chest of personal treasures, alongside trinkets and oddities from 100 adventures. Then he leaned back with a satisfied smile. To his crew, the frozen seas were a nightmare to forget. But to Jack Sparrow, they were simply another story, another legend, and another reminder that the world still had corners left to explore. And to Jack, nothing was more valuable than that. It was a calm morning on the Black Pearl when Jack Sparrow first heard about the city beneath the waves. He was sitting at a table in a tavern in Port Royal, sipping rum and winning a card game he had absolutely no right to win, when an old fisherman leaned close and whispered about a sunken city, an ancient kingdom swallowed by the sea long ago, where towers of coral now grew over golden spires and the streets were paved with treasure. Jack's eyes sparkled instantly. Sunken city, you say? Treasure just lying about, collecting barnacles, waiting for someone clever enough to liberate it. The fisherman nodded gravely. But beware, Captain. The city is guarded by the sea itself. No man has ever returned. To most people, that would sound like a warning. To Jack, it was an invitation. Within a week, the Pearl was at sea once more. The map the fisherman had drawn was vague at best, a squiggly mess of lines and waves, but Jack insisted he knew exactly where to go. The trick, he told Gibbs, is not to find the city. The trick is to let the city find you. The voyage was strange from the start. The water grew unnaturally still. The wind died, leaving the sails limp, yet the Pearl drifted forward as if pulled by unseen hands. The sea turned greenish, and fish with glowing eyes swam alongside the ship, watching them in silence. Then came the storm. Without warning, clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and a whirlpool opened before them. The Pearl was dragged down into the churning depths. The crew screamed, clinging to the rails, certain this was the end. But Jack stood at the wheel, grinning like a man who had just found the winning card in his sleeve. Down, down they went, until suddenly the whirlpool released them, and they found themselves in a vast cavern under the sea. Light filtered down from cracks above, casting the ruins in a shimmering glow. And there it was, the city. Sprawling streets lined with broken columns, toppled statues, and gleaming domes half buried in sand. Coral and seaweed grew over everything, but the glint of gold shone everywhere. Coins, jewelry, and treasures piled high in places where the sea had gathered them. Schools of silver fish darted between arches, and strange glowing eels slithered across stairways that led to nowhere. The crew was stunned. By thunder, Gibbs breathed, crossing himself. Atlantis. Jack, of course, was already halfway down the gangplank, calling over his shoulder. Come along, lads. Cities don't loot themselves. They splash through shallow water, filling their sacks with golden chalices, pearl necklaces, and strange jeweled crowns. Jack found a throne carved of crystal, half buried in sand, and sat upon it like a king. Rather suits me, don't you think? He said with a grin. But the city was not empty. The first sign was the singing. It echoed through the ruins, a haunting melody that made the crew's hair stand on end. Then came the shapes in the water, figures with long hair, shimmering tails, and eyes as sharp as daggers. Merfolk, dozens of them, circling the ruins, their spears glittering in the faint light. The crew panicked, dropping their loot, but Jack raised his hands in mock surrender. My dear scaly acquaintances, I come not to steal, but to admire. A little sightseeing, a touch of tourism, you understand. Beautiful city you've got here. Shame about the damp. The merfolk did not look amused. Their leader, a tall woman with a crown of shells, swam closer. This city belongs to the sea, she said coldly. Leave, or join those who sleep forever in the deep. Jack's grin wavered just slightly, but he quickly recovered. Sleep forever? Tempting offer, but I'm dreadfully busy. Appointments, taverns, debts to avoid. You know how it is. The merfolk were not swayed. Spears closed in. The crew begged Jack to abandon the treasure, but Jack, being Jack, tried one last trick. From his coat, he pulled a small, glowing crystal, the very one he had taken from the frozen seas. It pulsed with light in the water, casting strange reflections across the ruins. The merfolk stopped. Their eyes widened. The leader hissed something in a language the crew did not understand. Then, without warning, the waters surged, tossing Jack and his crew back toward the Pearl. The merfolk vanished into the depths, taking the city with them. In moments, the ruins crumbled, sinking into darkness as if they had never existed. When the Pearl surfaced again, tossed out of the whirlpool and back into the open sea, the crew collapsed with relief. Their treasure sacks were half empty, but they were alive. In his cabin later, Jack turned the glowing crystal in his hand, thinking. Twice now it had saved him, from shadows in the frozen seas, and from the merfolk in the drowned city. He tucked it carefully into a secret compartment, smiling to himself. To his crew, the city beneath the waves was a nightmare, a place better forgotten. But to Jack Sparrow, it was proof that the sea still had secrets, and he intended to uncover every last one. Most of Jack Sparrow's adventures took place on the sea. After all, that was where he belonged, on the deck of the Black Pearl, wind in his hair, compass in hand, chasing treasures across endless blue horizons. But once, just once, he found himself far from the ocean, stranded in the heart of a land so dry and endless that it made even the bravest sailor dream of waves. It was called the Desert of Bones. The story began when Jack claimed a small map from a Spanish officer during a late-night card game. The officer swore it led to the lost tomb of an ancient king, buried deep in a desert where no man dared wander. Gold piled high as mountains, the man promised, his hands shaking as Jack slipped the map into his pocket. Now, Jack was not fond of deserts. Too much sun, too little rum, and not nearly enough water. But gold piled high as mountains? That was enough to make him forget his dislike. So with the pearl anchored in a hidden cove, Jack gathered a few brave, or foolish, souls and set off inland on camels he had never learned to ride. The desert was cruel from the start. Days burned with unbearable heat, nights froze with biting cold, and sandstorms rose suddenly, blinding them and filling their mouths with grit. The crew cursed Jack's name at least 20 times a day, but he kept walking, waving the map confidently. "Almost there," he said each morning, even though the map's strange symbols looked more like scribbles than directions. "You've just got to squint at it properly. Tilt your head, maybe hold it upside down. See, clear as crystal." At last, when hope was running out, they stumbled upon it. Rising from the sand like the bones of some long-dead beast was a ruined city. Crumbled towers, half-buried statues, and wide steps leading down into a black doorway carved with skulls and serpents. "This," Jack announced proudly, brushing sand from his hat, "is either the tomb of a king or the world's most decorative wine cellar. Either way, we're going in." Inside, the air was cool and heavy. Torches lit with strange green flames as they passed, though no one touched them. The walls were covered in carvings of warriors, battles, and a king sitting on a throne of bones. And everywhere, bones. Human, animal, even massive creatures no one could name, piled in corners and built into the very walls. The deeper they went, the richer the treasure. Gold coins littered the floors, jewels gleamed in cracked urns, and silver weapons leaned against dusty walls. The crew's fear began to fade as their greed took over. But Jack noticed something. The bones weren't old and brittle. They were fresh, and many of the skulls were grinning. That was when the whispers began. Just as in the cave of skulls he had once found, the voices came softly at first, then louder. The bones rattled, shifting, and then they rose. From the piles of bones, warriors assembled themselves, skeletons held together by nothing but magic and hate. They picked up rusted swords and spears, eyes glowing with fire. The crew screamed and bolted for the exit, but the skeletons blocked the way. Jack, ever calm in chaos, raised a hand. "Gentlemen, ladies, and rattling fellows, there's no need for violence. We're simply passing through, with a little light souvenir shopping." The skeletons did not laugh. They advanced. Jack grabbed a jeweled dagger from a pedestal and, with an uncharacteristic burst of bravery, or foolishness, held it high. The skeletons froze. Then slowly they bowed. Gibbs, peeking from behind a column, gasped, "Captain, I think that dagger belonged to the king." Indeed, as Jack turned it in the torchlight, the carvings on the wall seemed to glow, showing the same dagger held in the king's hand. By accident or fate, Jack had taken the one relic that commanded the army of bones. Naturally, Jack grinned. "Well then, my bony subjects, I hereby promote myself to Desert King Sparrow." The skeletons stood silently, waiting for his command. Jack considered ordering them to carry the treasure back to the pearl, but the look in their fiery eyes made him think better of it. Instead, he carefully slid the dagger back into the pedestal. The skeletons sank back into stillness, collapsing into piles of bones once more. The crew wasted no time fleeing the tomb, carrying whatever treasure they could stuff into their sacks. They didn't stop until the ruined city was a distant shadow on the horizon. Back on the Pearl, Gibbs swore never to follow Jack into a desert again. The crew agreed, tossing away the last grains of sand from their boots. But Jack kept a single coin from the tomb, one with a skull carved on it. He flipped it between his fingers thoughtfully. "To most men," he mused, "gold is the reward. But to me, the story's the true treasure." He smiled. Of course, the gold doesn't hurt either. And so, the legend of Captain Jack Sparrow grew again. Not just a pirate of the seas, but a thief bold enough to rob the tomb of a king in the middle of the endless desert and survive. Jack Sparrow was not fond of mountains. They were tall, cold, and very solid, which was the opposite of the sea, where things were supposed to move and sway and sometimes sink. But when Jack heard about the Mountain of Fire, he made an exception. The tale reached him in a smoky tavern far across the ocean. A scarred sailor, missing half his teeth and both his shoes, whispered of a volcano on a remote island, its heart burning with endless flames. The sailor swore that inside the mountain's fiery throat lay a forge of the gods, where weapons were shaped from molten gold, stronger than steel and more precious than any jewel. The only problem was that the mountain was alive. Jack, of course, didn't blink. Alive, dead, or slightly unwell, it makes no difference. Treasure is treasure, my good man. Now, about the exact location of this fiery little holiday spot. And so, with his compass pointing in directions no sane man would trust, the Black Pearl set sail. The island appeared on the horizon like a giant claw rising from the sea. Smoke curled from the top of the volcano, and the water around it bubbled with heat. The crew muttered darkly. Gibbs wiped sweat from his brow. "Mark me, Jack, this place reeks of doom." Jack adjusted his hat and sniffed. "That, my dear Gibbs, is the smell of opportunity. Possibly also burnt rum. Either way, we press on." They anchored near a black sand beach, where the air shimmered with heat. Every step up the slope grew harder, the ground hot enough to scorch boots. Rivers of lava snaked down the mountain's sides, glowing red in the dimming light. The crew groaned and swore with every step, but Jack pushed on, mumbling about golden swords and crowns that could buy entire fleets. At last they reached a cave mouth, wide and dark, with warm air blasting out like the breath of a dragon. Jack lit a torch and strode inside. The tunnel twisted and wound, opening into a vast cavern glowing with molten rivers. And there, resting on black stone pedestals, were weapons unlike any they had seen, blades forged of shimmering gold, shields that glowed with fire, and helmets encrusted with rubies. The crew gasped. Jack's grin nearly split his face. "Well, lads, I believe we've struck the fiery mother lode." But before they could grab a single sword, the mountain rumbled. The ground shook, rocks tumbled from above, and the rivers of lava surged higher. From the molten pools, shapes began to rise, giants of flame and stone, their eyes burning like coals. They were guardians, forged from the mountain itself, and they did not look pleased. The crew screamed and bolted, but the giants blocked the path. Jack, standing with his torch and his smirk, held up his hands. Now, fiery gentlemen, surely we can reach some kind of warm agreement? You keep the lava, I keep a trinket or two, everyone's happy." The giants raised their molten fists. Jack's smirk wavered. He darted forward, snatching up a golden sword from the pedestal. The moment his hand touched it, the blade flared with light, and the giants paused. The cavern echoed with a deep voice, as if the mountain itself was speaking. "Only the worthy may carry the fire." Jack blinked. "Worthy, eh? Splendid. That's me all over. Ask anyone." The mountain rumbled again, as if unimpressed. The giants moved closer. Jack swung the sword wildly, and to his shock, arcs of flame leapt from the blade, forcing the giants back. The crew cheered, their fear replaced by awe. Jack, chest puffed out, gave a dramatic bow. "Seems I was born for fiery things." But the sword grew heavier in his hand, burning hotter with every second. His smirk faltered. "On second thought, perhaps worthy is a matter of opinion." The blade flared one last time, then shattered into sparks, vanishing in a burst of smoke. The giants froze, then slowly sank back into the lava. The cavern fell silent, except for the hiss and pop of molten rock. Jack stood coughing, his hair singed, his coat smoking. "Right, that went mostly well. Shall we?" The crew needed no convincing. They scrambled out of the cave and down the mountain, sliding on black sand until they reached the beach. Behind them, the volcano rumbled again, spewing fire into the sky. Back aboard the Pearl, Gibbs shook his head. "All that danger, and we came away with nothing." Jack pulled a small, blackened fragment of the sword from his pocket, still faintly glowing. He twirled it between his fingers with a sly smile. "Nothing, Mr. Gibbs. On the contrary, we came away with a story. And this little trinket, which, if you squint at it properly, is worth at least a few drinks." The crew groaned, but Jack only laughed, steering the Pearl back to sea. For him, the Mountain of Fire was not a failure. It was proof that even the earth itself could not hold back Captain Jack Sparrow.